Welcome to the NBCPA Black History Month podcast series. Today, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Wayne McKenzie, who is the immediate past chair of the American Bar Association Criminal Justice Section. Wayne is also general counsel for the New York Department of Probation, and prior to joining the DOP, Wayne was the founding director of the Prosecution and Racial Justice Program at the Vera Institute of Justice. Before joining Vera, Wayne was a deputy bureau chief in the Kings County District Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, New York, where he prosecuted high-profile cases in several specialized bureaus, including domestic violence, rackets and gangs, major narcotics investigations, and crimes against children. Wayne is the immediate past chair of the American Bar Criminal Justice Section. Additionally, he is the past commissioner of the ABA Center for Racial and Ethnic Diversity and the Council on Racial and Ethnic Justice, and also a member of the Standing Committee on Gun Violence. He's a past chair of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association in New York City and a recipient of the NBPA's Public Servant of the Year Award. He's also a past president of the National Black Prosecutors Association and a two-time recipient of the NBPA Presidential Award. Wayne is an active participant in community outreach and mentoring programs and has a special interest in efforts and advocacy that focus on diversity in the legal profession, youth and racial and ethnic justice, and combating the collateral consequences of criminal convictions. He received his Juris Doctorate degree from George Washington University School of Law, where he served as chairperson of the Black Law Students Association. Wayne, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Hey, how are you?
I'm good, Wayne. I'm good.
Good.
Fantastic. So can I start, Wayne, by asking you, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Sure. Well, when Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was the founder of what was then known as Negro History Week, he once said that those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history. And that probably sounds similar to a proverb, right? People without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And so here in the US, Black History Month is February. And originally that week in February was chosen because it was the believed birth month, of Frederick Douglass. And Abraham Lincoln, who abolished slavery, was born on February 12th.
Yeah.
So that week was chosen, and it was done so in recognition of the historical role both men played in abolishing slavery. Now, as the father of Black history, Dr. Woodson's aim was to encourage and inspire people of all ethnic and social backgrounds to discuss the Black experience. It was a way of teaching students and young people about Black and African American contributions, because such stories have largely been forgotten and were a neglected part of the national narrative. And so in that spirit, I've experienced, I embrace, I try to educate. But I'll say this, as I've grown older and hopefully a tad bit wiser, the realization that Black history is American history. Black history is world history, not lessons to be learned or embraced for 1 week or 1 month. But it's a necessary, rich, and sometimes tragic, history that actually belongs to the world. Now, don't get me wrong, many other ethnicities, nationalities have specific time periods to celebrate their cultural achievements and the contributions made by their ancestors. And that's not what I'm really alluding to, because in that vein, when you think about us as Black people, That means so would the discrete nationalities and ethnicities of the African diaspora. Um, so consequently, as proud as I am to display the red, black, and green colors uh, of Black History Month, and as enthused as I am to talk about and hear about and continue to learn about the significant contributions of people of African descent, for me, it's also a reminder of how and why it came to be. Um, and for me, it serves as fuel to continue the struggle for racial justice, for social justice, for equality and equity, and for our history and our narrative taking its rightful place as world history.
Thanks, Wayne. And following on from the last point you made, this year's theme for Black History Month is time for change, action, not words. What does this look like for you as a person of color?
Oh, well, for me personally, it means continue toiling in the places and spaces with the work that I currently do. And I don't mean just, vocationally. It seems that I've always had the fortune, the opportunity, and the burden to be surrounded by like-minded peers and mentors. And I've had mentors who weren't just counselors or coaches, but they were literally players and doers who led by example. And so I embrace that. And an example of that is, for example, in law school, you mentioned that I was the past chair of the um, Black Law Students Association, but that wasn't enough. I got involved in, we had a minority recruitment committee. And as part of this recruitment committee, I went out around the country trying to recruit people of color to apply to the law schools. But that wasn't enough. What this committee also did for those people of color who did apply, we read through every single application and we made recommendations to the admissions committee. We advocated for people that we thought they were overlooking and for individuals that we thought had a really good chance next time around. We actually coached them on how to make their applications more competitive the next time around. Why am I using that example? Because when I started law school, out of a class of 425 individuals, there were only 8 Blacks, 6 women, and 2 Black males, myself and my roommate. By the time we graduated 3 years later, the incoming class of Blacks had 50 plus students. So for me, um, that's action, not just words, not just speaking to the administration about the lack of color in the school, but actually doing something about it.
And I think that's a fantastic example of what that question is trying to demonstrate. So thank you for that, Wayne. Um, as the immediate past chair of the American Bar Association Criminal Justice Section, how do you see your personal responsibility to progress diversity and inclusion within that particular space?
Um, it's huge.
Yeah.
I see it as a paramount obligation and responsibility. Nate, I understand both the importance and the symbolism of what I represent as a Black man in that leadership space. And I appreciate the duality of those obligations. And what I mean by that is, I wasn't the Black chair of the criminal justice section, right? I wasn't the chair of the Black criminal justice section. I was the representative of every single member of that section, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, gender identification, political affiliation, etc. That being said, um, I also felt a personal obligation and a personal mandate to promote the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, I've got an obligation to those that pave the road towards and open that door for me. My obligation is no longer holding that door open, but demolishing it and installing a revolving door, if you know what I mean, for those Black criminal justice professionals that are following me, especially in an organization that for more than a century did not welcome us. Um, and so I've been laboring in that space, I think, all my professional career. On the other hand, I also have to acknowledge that the leadership and membership of the criminal justice section, they've been extremely committed to diversity, equity, and inclusions, and not just in thought, but really in action. So committed to it that, as a matter of fact, if you are elected chair-elect of the section, what comes along with that is also the title of Chief Diversity Officer for the section. And so, I mean, we've even created an implicit bias training curriculum. Well, I was part of the first one, and now there's a reimagined curriculum that we're training justice professionals all across the United States. So that commitment is huge and it's unwavering.
I can imagine. And Wayne, just to give us a bit of understanding of the scope of how big that role is, how many members approximately within the criminal justice section of the Criminal Bar Association?
Sure. Well, we have well over, I'll say well over 1,000, I mean, well over 7,000 dues paying members.
Wow.
But when you think about the affiliate members, and when you think about the scope of our reach, we are the primary body for establishing criminal justice policy in the United States. Our resolutions, for example, are often used in Congress to support laws and legislation. Our criminal justice standards that we developed are often cited by the United States Supreme Court in decisions that they make. When we put out model rules, different states base their own rules and laws on policies that we've created. So the touch is huge, not just in the US, because we also work in international spaces as well.
So an absolutely huge portfolio and massive responsibility. Um, Wayne, can I ask you, following on from that, do you think there is enough being done to represent Black voices in the criminal justice system in the United States?
Um, well, there's certainly enough being done to overrepresent our voices on the consumption end of criminal justice services, if you know what I mean. Uh, And when one looks at certain major metropolitan areas here in the US, such as New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, you know, the counties contiguous to Atlanta's Fulton County, um, Baltimore City, Maryland, you see and you hear Black and brown voices in every single criminal justice space, ranging from the prosecution space, including being elected prosecutors or chief prosecutors, the defense bar, the public defender offices, and even leadership in other law enforcement agencies, such as police departments. Um, and even in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., we can boast of having had two United States attorneys general of African descent. And I guess I need to acknowledge the one person of Hispanic descent that, you know, um, we've had, although you can hear from my voice, I had a total um, differences of opinion over his philosophies. um, but the overwhelming truth is that, generally speaking, across the country, the criminal justice apparatus is not reflective or representative of the communities of color that they serve. We've come a long way, but the road ahead sometimes appears to be longer than the path we've already traveled. And so, yes, the number of Black and Brown voices are more than in the past. These voices are growing louder and gaining greater influence, but we're not there yet. And I feel that the current generation will make even greater strides, especially when at a time it's predicted that they could be the first generation to fare worse than their parents and grandparents. Um, but I would be remiss if I don't also add, it's even more important when you talk about these voices, their representations in the health, education, social justice and equity, and economic opportunity spaces and places. You know, that's the real hope for the cure. We in the criminal justice system, we merely treat the failures and inequalities and inequities of these other systems. In other words, we just address the symptoms. The cure stands when we have true voices and power and authority in those other spaces.
Because I'd agree with you there, because I think we tend to sit at the very end of the process, and I think some of the other bodies that you just made reference to, it was proper intervention at those stages. It would make things, I think, a lot easier when it comes
Absolutely.
to the very end. So that's a really excellent point. So thank you for that. When I'm going to ask you our final question, what would you say was the biggest barrier that you've had to overcome within your career?
Um, wow. Uh, as you can imagine, there been a few, um, but I guess within the context of our profession, because I mean there were barriers way before, and even into and throughout, you know, law school. But I guess the one that I will choose was an experience that almost made me walk away from being a prosecutor. As a young prosecutor, I was assigned to the courtroom of a particular judge who happened to be an African American woman and who was viewed as extremely pro defense and a quote unquote enemy of the office. And it was thought that because of my color, my demeanor, the way I had already distinguished myself so early in my career in the office, that I could make a difference in her courtroom. Part of her strategy was she would avoid trying cases because if a case went to a jury, well, that sort of lessened her ability to influence the outcome of the case. And so for the first part of my early career as a felony trial assistant, I was in her part. And in fact, I got the first conviction in her court part. Um, Ultimately, it was thought that they were sort of wasting my talents because they didn't get the traction they thought they were going to. And I was put on this specific pilot project to work on cases. And it was where we were um, processing cases from intake to trial in less than 2 to 3 months, as opposed to the 8 or 9 months in normal trial bureaus. In fact, one day I started 3 trials in one day and they all pled out, just to give you an
Wow.
idea of how prepared we were. When the time came to promote individuals to senior trial attorneys, everyone in my bureau, and I must say, even in my arrogance and ignorance, I even thought that I was a shoo-in for promotion. And we were all shocked when I was not promoted. And the excuse that I was given by my deputy at the time was there was a minimum requirement of having not second seated, having been the lead attorney on a minimum of 10 trials. Now, I had more trial experience than anyone in my bureau because early in my career, I was offered the opportunity to second seat some of the biggest cases in the office. And I really thought that was extremely unfair. And this is why. And when I had a conversation with my chief, he actually agreed with me. Because of my race, you used me as a pawn in front of a judge that you knew did not try cases. I did extremely well in front of her, but obviously didn't get the trials that some of my colleagues would have gotten. You then put me in a pilot project where the outcomes that you wanted, we accomplished, we achieved. That meant that we were pleading out significantly more cases than we were trying. And my reward for that, for over excelling in both those assignments, has been that I miss being promoted. Now, had I been white, I would not have been given that first assignment. And so I said, I'm on my way out the door. My chief understood my point. He asked me not to resign. And in a couple of months, I was made an acting senior trial attorney. And the way I describe acting senior trial attorney is where I had all of the responsibilities of a senior trial attorney, and I had to act like I was being paid like one. But again, good fortune, because later that year, I was actually the first person in my class that was then made a deputy bureau chief.
Oh,
So the story had a good ending, but a very, very dicey start.
And I think it just demonstrates your level of perseverance as well, Wayne, as well. So that's a fantastic story.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, Wayne, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this afternoon. And can I just thank you on behalf of the NBCPA for taking part in our Black History Month podcast series. We really appreciate it.
Well, I absolutely appreciate you extending the invitation. You know that National Black Crown Prosecution Association has a special place in my heart. And so anytime you call, I'm going to answer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Wayne. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Same here. Take care.